Hey guys, it's Rich Yoder, the owner of Yellowstone Post Frame. Hey, today we're going to be talking about metal. Talk about all the different gauges, styles, colors, and kind of when to use certain things, what to keep in mind when picking your style of color for looks, for how long it will last and all that stuff. So I'm going to dive right into it. The first thing, our typical metal that we still use a lot is our typical pole barn metal. Our supplier calls this a tough rib. It might be called something different where you're from. It's just a standard 9-inch on center, rib, round rib, kind of 3-foot panel, exposed fastener. Get it 29 gauge, 26 gauge. This is your typical run-of-the-mill metal for most pole barns and stuff. So the next upgrade that we have that we've been starting to use a lot, especially on like a little more high-end residential, barn doors is becoming a big thing for it. It looks like a standing seam from a distance. It's still a 3-foot panel, and it's got the sharper ribs, 1 foot, so a little bit wider, kind of has that flat, sharp, like a standing seam. It's still exposed fasteners. Our supplier actually calls it the poor man's standing seam. So it's, a little bit of an upgrade, not much, 40 by 60 is about $1,500, more for this style of metal than that, but it goes on the same way and use same trim and all that. So, doesn't take any more labor really. So it's not much more, it's a very cheap upgrade, but it still has the exposed fasteners. You can get this in 29 and 26 gauge. I would not recommend getting it in 29 gauge. Put it on, it's not very rugged. It's called rugged rib, it's not very rugged. So 26 gauge is really good. Main thing is it has these big flats, and it really, like, you can put it down on a roof and not touch it at all, and it just kind of looks a little wrinkly, like oil canny. So you definitely want the thicker gauge, because that's gonna, and the other thing too, I'll explain this a little bit later, how you can kind of get away from seeing some of that stuff, those wrinkles and stuff. But that's definitely a middle of the road option, not much more of a cost wise, but it looks different, and it just doesn't look as much like a barn when you're trying to go for like a barn door and stuff, but not pump a bunch of money into it. And obviously our high-end option is always going to be the standing seam metal, where you hide the fasteners and you would lock the next piece on here. These are 16-inch panels, 26 gauge or 24 gauge. Get it in about all the same colors. Everything's just hidden. So the cost for these, to get these and to get all your trim and stuff, is not a whole lot more money. It's more just labor intensive. So you're getting somebody to do it, you're gonna have to pay a lot more labor for it. So that's, but this is more of like, if you got a high-end barn and you just want it, you're willing to put more money into it, and you want your roof to last longer, so you don't have the exposed fasteners and stuff. This is definitely the way to go. But a lot of people also, what we've done is just they put it on the roof, because that's where it's going to be more useful, and then the sides maybe they do the rugged rib or something like that. So you do not have to do it on the sidewall. It's probably doing less good on the sidewall, but you can get that, a thicker gauge and everything, but it's just 2 to 3 times the price of this stuff here. So, you gotta just take that in consideration. And then, obviously, there's a lot more other styles. There's about 13 styles that you can do, like board and batten is, we just don't do a lot of those. These are our typical ones. This kind of covers our, because we're pole barn builders, and a little bit more on the simpler barn doors. We can do, high-end barn doors too, but this kind of covers a lot of that. So this is kind of our typical stuff, but we can do like board and batten and some other flatter rib stuff. And there's just PBR panel, like the typical one that they put on a steel building. Like, we've done some of that rarely, but there's all these different styles. There's also a lot of colors now. You can get it to where it looks like old barn wood, and you can get them in these panels here, and you just put it on with exposed fasteners. But from a distance a little bit, it looks really cool, because it looks like a cedar plank board or wood grain or barn wood or some of that. So that's kind of exciting. We can do that, but all those are kind of premium upgrades. I don't really have a lot of prices off the top of my head, but that's stuff that we can do. Obviously, all these have 40-year paint warranties on them, are kind of across the board. So, it's it's meant to last, even the exposed fastener ones. You know, you may have to change out the screws at 20 years, or just go check them and make sure your washers are good. But that's a simple thing to do too. But and then the other thing is gauges. 26 gauge, that's what we run a lot into, is 29 and 26 gauge. 26 gauge is always going to be stronger. I would love to go 26 gauge standard, but you know, we're talking pole barns. People come to us because they want usually a cheaper option for building. 29 gauge still does the job. It's still going to shed water just as long and last just as long. It's more of a looks thing. And if, you know, we build our buildings strong enough to where I don't think it matters. We don't use the metal for the strength as much. So, but 29 gauge does the job, especially if you're doing simple stuff and you don't really care as much about looks. It's just 29 gauge doesn't hide like lumber. It's got to be really perfect behind it, or it'll really show way more than 26. But also other factors that play into those looks are if you have darker metal and if you have the shiny metal like this stuff here, and it's darker it is, the more it'll stand out. And it's really about how the sun reflects off of it, because you can look at it and it looks totally fine, then you walk around a little bit and all of a sudden, boom, man, it really sticks out. The other thing you can do too, if you don't want to, you know, because like going from 29 to 26 gauge, like 30 by 40, you're talking like $3,000, or that would be a 40 by 60, about $3,000. A 30 by 40, you know, $1,700 So it's a little bit of a price difference, but if you really care about looks and you value that, and it's just, you know, stronger product, you know, that's not that big a deal. But the other thing, if you don't want to do it, is this other finish that we have. It's called Crinkle, and you can't get it in a lot of finishes. There's only like a black, slate, gray, a couple of those, and then red. I think there's one red. But I don't know if you can really see it, but it's got a rougher finish, but it doesn't have that shiny gloss finish to it, so the sun doesn't reflect off of it. So if you get this in like 29 gauge and you get that crinkle finish, it's only like a couple $100 upgrade on like a 30 by 40 and maybe 800 on a 40 by 60 or 1,000. So it's cheaper than going to the 29 or the 26 gauge, but it does really not reflect those dimples where you try to put a screw in. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, it's just put your screw in too tight. Well, I've been out where you can't even get the screw to the washer and it's already showing on 29 gauge. So you can make it look better by being careful, but if you really want it to not show anything, you probably need to go to 26 gauge and the crinkle finish. But if you want to do just a variation of that and not go quite that costly, you could just do 29 and get it in a crinkle finish, and it'll really kind of hide a lot of that too, because it won't reflect as bad. So I'm going to go out, and I have two sheds out there that are 26 and 29 gauge, and I'll kind of show you what I mean by those dimples and how you kind of can see it, how it reflects and stuff. It's always going to look way worse in the sun. So it can look really good and then all of a sudden not. So, but it's metal. It does a little of that. But that's kind of when I would go up to 26 gauge. If you care about looks, definitely go to 26 gauge. And the crinkle is another option that can kind of hide that. But it's going to be more costly. The cheapest thing is 29 gauge non-crinkle finish. So it's just going to go up from there. So just find out what you value, and that way, you know, you don't get something that you thought was going to be one way and then it turns out it wasn't, you know, what you thought you were getting. So just hope that helps. So we're going to run out there and I'll show you that, and that way you guys can get a better visual on it. So hope all this helps. All right, so we're out here. Hopefully you can hear me. It's pretty loud out here by the street, but as you can see, you can kind of see those dimples. I'm trying to show it if the sun was shining on it, it would look worse, but so that one, I purposely, those are pretty bad. As you can see the dimples? Those ones are pretty bad. So this is 29 gauge, but even here where you you're kind of careful with it, you can still see around some of these screws, it's still a little bit of a dimple. So you're just always going to have a little of that with 29 gauge. There's definitely ways to make it better. Like these up here they're probably over tightened a little bit. But over here, this is 26 gauge. And as you can tell, you're just not getting the same. It just looks wise, it's just always going to cover that a lot more. So hope that helps.